Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Chris. I'm a bookseller at Boswell Book Company here in Milwaukee. And you're not watching this live, but in case you're curious, we're recording this on day 5,611 of Boswell being in business. I'm here, yeah, right. I'm here to talk to Rufi Thorpe. She's the author of 4 novels, and those novels are The Girls from Corona Del Mar, longlisted for the International Dylan Thomas Prize, and the Flaherty Dunham First Novel Prize. Also author of Dear Fang with Love. She's also author of The Knockout Queen. It was a finalist for the Penn Faulkner Award. It was also my top #1 favorite book of 2020. One of the bright spots in that year for me.
That was a rough year.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm thrilled to have you here. I'm thrilled to talk about the new book, Margo's Got Money Problems. There it is. Um, it is finally the OnlyFans novel we've all been waiting for. Um, Also, in my little review, I say that I think it's the perfect book to let the world in on the secret. It's been too well kept that I think Rufi Thorpe's one of the best novelists in America. She crams like a whole world into this thing. It's beautiful, angry, tenderhearted, story of love, sex, motherhood, money, family, pro wrestling, the internet, agency, and artifice. You are going to fall in love with this novel. Rufi, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Your write-up of the novel is so beautiful.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well, I couldn't have done it without you. Totally. So I will warn you, and I will warn anybody watching this that I have a bunch of kind of rambly, long questions written down. Because I love these books so much, I really kind of want to just go on and on about them. So please don't feel free to shut me up at any point. But just to start, I'm so glad you're the person who did it. Somebody had to do it. You wrote the OnlyFans novel. And let me start with, I've had some folks while I've been hand selling this novel ask me like, well, what is OnlyFans? What is that? And the thing is, I think they're lying. I think they know what it is. I think, there's some cases where they don't want to admit in front of their kid or something that they know what it is, but they totally do. But for us, nice, chaste, repressed Midwesterners, can you tell us what's OnlyFans and why'd you want to write a book about it?
Well, OnlyFans is sort of the merger of porn and social media, in that you can imagine if there was an Instagram account that you paid to follow that then had like spicy pictures on it. And so it is a democratization of sex work, kind of in the same way that YouTube was a democratization of video and allowing people to make their own content. And so you're sort of putting the means of production in the hands of sex workers instead of having them be working for like a larger like pornographic film production company, or working in a club for somebody else. They get to dictate the terms of the content and sell it themselves and see all the financial reward. So it's a really interesting and kind of exciting time, because that democratization means that like there's all different kinds of content being made by wildly different personalities, and people are doing different things with it. And I think that I'm one of those people that loves the internet and like sees everything that it's becoming and is sort of like enchanted by it. And so OnlyFans, for me, I was really interested in it because for a long time I had wanted to write a motherhood sex worker character, but I always felt like, oh, I'll never be able to do it. I'll never be able to do it. This stigma against sex work in our culture is so strong, and we put mothers up on such a pedestal. Like, how could I do it? And so OnlyFans, I just felt like people were a little bit less judgmental when they were talking about it, in part because you can make so much money, and in part because it's online and so it feels safer, just less physical risk. And so people feel like it's less difficult to imagine yourself doing it.
Yeah, I think too, something you touched on too is like the explosion of this, particularly the explosions of all kinds of different content too. I mean, as a writer, that's got to be such a fascinating way to be able to peek into all of these different kind of corners of the strange, the sexual, the perverse, whatever. I mean, that's kind of amazing, right?
Yeah, and it's also amazing, like, I don't know how, like, the bulk of what I saw was not even like, oh, this is so like perverse or strange. But I mean, it was strange in the sense that like it's like guys are like, I'm following you because you remind me of a girl that I had a crush on in seventh grade. You look just like her. You know what I mean? Like a
Oh,
lot of
really?
like what human appetites are actually like charmingly mundane, you know?
Right. Yeah. I think this way into the novel too, I think for me, it's a perfect way to explore what I see as like a central theme in a bunch of your books, which I don't have a better way of describing other than Rufi Thorpe's economics of morality, I guess. And I realize I don't really have a question, but do you have a comment about that?
No, I do. Well, I mean, I think that problem of how do you judge people? What do you do when good people do bad things? Is punishment a thing that works? Why are we so obsessed with it when it doesn't seem to do anything? Those are really abiding artistic preoccupations for me. And I think um, in this novel, I mean, so much of Margot's coming of age is once you step outside of public opinion and you are doing something that is going to make everyone think ill of you, how then do you guide your own moral behavior? You kind of have to really take ownership of your own ethical system and be like, because you can't just use other people's good opinion as a guide anymore. You know, so then how do you decide, well, what kind of person do I want to be? How do I think what I'm doing is unethical? How do I take ownership for my own actions? And I feel like that's actually what coming of age is sort of all about, is like you lose the belief systems of your parents and they kind of get deposed as the rulers of your life or the arbiters of right and wrong, and you have to kind of like find your own new way. And so that's very much like her journey. And I wanted to write about like the actual mechanics of empowerment, you know, like how does that happen internally that you get pushed to a point where you decide to take ownership of yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this book's a pretty incredible portrait of how that happens. I mean, at a very human level, at a very day in, day out level. Um, what do I want to ask you? Speaking of the day in, day out, speaking of just the little things, Margot's OnlyFans identity, I think it's such a perfect internet handle, Hungry Ghost. Where'd that come from?
Um, okay, well, really honestly, okay. So
It's
there
like
was this guy. This is a long. Okay, for my like 23rd birthday party, it wound up being a house party at my friend Leroy's house, and there was a guy there who played a song on the acoustic guitar that had like one of the refrains was like, I'm a hungry ghost. And always had it in my head, and I've always been looking for what song was that, and I can't find it anywhere. And so like I even have like tried to hunt down the guy to be like, is that an original song? Like where did this song come from? So the phrase hungry ghost has just been in my head for a really long time, and thinking about, I don't know, so much of one of the things that I so enjoyed writing about Margo is in that postpartum nursing period, like you're so hungry all the time, and like food, I feel like it must be what being a teenage boy is like. Like I just unendingly, and like I could eat disgusting amount of food and feel great after. Like I could run. You know what I mean? Like just amazing. I was like, "Oh, this is good. That's what I needed." And so I wanted to like give her that hunger and that vitality and that, I don't know, like maybe just to also kind of underscore there's all these really like vital processes that are a part of being alive that we also have all this weird Victorian shame around. Sex is one of them, eating and gluttony. Like there's all these parts of our animal nature that we have really mixed feelings about. And on a sort of surface scientific level, it's like, well, why should we? You know, like it's like eating. It's like, why is it shameful to like to eat? Like you have to do it in order to keep living. Like if you want humans to continue, people have to have sex. Like why is it shameful exactly? Why did we start doing that? It's an odd thing for a group of animals to start doing, to take their most basic processes and begin to become ashamed of them. So I think that's part of the underlying thinking behind Hungry Ghost. And then I don't really know how I figured out that character. I sort of like put myself in the situation where I was like, shit, now I have to come up with something good enough that it could seem like it could go viral or people would want to watch it on TikTok. And I really don't even know how I came up with the idea of her being an alien. I just I liked her being, like, I liked her being unfamiliar with human customs. I liked that idea. I liked the idea of her, like eating things that aren't food, big in part because I was doing all this other like life and hunger stuff. But I think one of the things, so this book was very, very long and got cut to be a normal length book.
Really?
And so one of the things that was cut was just a lot more TikToks, because in order to understand how, it was like I had to figure out how I would do it. And so I was like literally trying to like write week by week what I thought they would be releasing. And everyone was like, we do not need to read TikToks. Like, that's not, you watch TikToks, you don't read descriptions of TikToks. And I was like, oh, right. Makes sense.
Yeah. Wow. That is all fabulous. As you're talking about, all these strange things, and speaking of the internet, it just reminds me of one of my all-time favorite tweets, which is, God says, look, I've created man. And the angel said, you fucked up a perfectly good monkey is what you did. It's got anxiety. And yeah. I love the other half of this book. It's not even half, but another huge part of this book is pro wrestling, right? Or the other topic, if you will, right? And when I tell people that when I'm selling the book, there's definitely a moment of disconnect. Like OnlyFans, online sex work, pro wrestlers, huh? And I don't want to answer this question for you, but I will tell you my answer is like, I think you do such a great job of using both of these things to explore how performers create personas, how we create these public faces, and create stories. So what for you was the moment when you were like, oh, these two things kind of point in the same direction. This works together.
Well, okay, so I got obsessed with pro wrestling almost coincidentally at the time when I was first trying to start writing this book. And I think I did not grow up watching pro wrestling. I was raised by a single mom and my grandmother. It was like a strictly Shirley Temple and musical theater household. So I did not grow up watching WWE, but my husband did and is very sentimental about it. And so he would put it on, I think trying to get our boys to fall in love with it. And then I fell in love with it. And immediately realized that there were all these memoirs and wrestling memoirs. Like, there's a very rich tradition of wrestlers writing memoirs. Almost every major wrestler has written one, if not multiple memoirs. And the stories are just insane. It is every 5 pages, someone is getting their eye poked out or shitting their pants. Like, it's just so good that I was reading them just nonstop, just for fun. And me and my mom walked the dogs together every day. And I was telling her yet another story about a wrestler pooping their pants. And she was like, if only there was a way you could work this into your book. Like, maybe that would divert some of these stories so that I didn't have to hear all of them on our daily dog walks. And I was like, oh, there's no way of putting it in there, because like my first thought was like, oh, but I don't want Margo to become a wrestler. And I also don't want the ethos of the book to be leave sex work for wrestling, because that's better. You know what I mean? Like, that's not,
Yeah.
not what I'm trying to say. So, then I was like, but wait, what if it was her dad? And from the moment that I started thinking about it, because there just were so many commonalities, like you say, in terms of creating a persona, but also in terms of using your body to make money, taking physical risks, and doing something that makes other people look down on you automatically, but that there's not anything technically wrong with. Like, they're both viewed as being trashy, kind of. And so I just was really interested in that. And then the moment that I went to try and write Jinx, I was really nervous about having him be like an active wrestler. I think the moment that I decided, I was kind of like loosely basing him not off of, I don't actually and purposely did not learn anything about Paul Ellering's life, but Paul Ellering was the the manager of the Road Warriors, and like he had this kind of like contrasting style where he'd have like he'd be in a suit and with the Wall Street Journal rolled up always, and then they were like Hawk and Animal were like these forces, these sort of like id like forces that he was then the super ego of. And I just loved that idea, and kind of from the moment that I started writing him, he was so much fun to write, and he came alive on the page, and like I was like, okay, here's the book, because it was so also claustrophobic and lonely in that apartment before he got there, you know, like and because that postpartum period is claustrophobic and lonely. I think part of the reason there's not that many great books about like postpartum period is because like it is claustrophobic and lonely during that period, and not a lot happens except for this like wild unfolding of love for your baby.
You've got to be excited about the new book about NWO then that's coming out.
Oh yes, I am.
So yeah. Um yeah, sorry, that's a strange aside from what you were saying, but so be it. Um
Are you a wrestling fan?
I mean I was when I was 12,
Yeah.
um, which is a different era.
Oh, very.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I watched wrestling, but mostly to keep up with my friends who are watching wrestling. But I think it's definitely a phase. I think my nephew's about to go through it. So yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of having a resurgence right now. I'm a big Rhea Ripley fan, so this era has been kind of fun for me. Um, you can understand any wrestler whose tagline is "Mommy's always on top" is going to have my immediate patronage. You know.
Totally. Totally. Um, Speaking of stigma, and looking at different performers, I think you uh sorry, let me start that over. Ugh. Yeah. Speaking of stigma, you've talked about it in other interviews about OnlyFans, and you were talking about that in wrestling. Um, it exploded during the pandemic. The user numbers exponentially grew, and perhaps has, at least for online sex work, kind of helped to destigmatize that. Do you want to talk about that at all, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think they went from 20 million users to 120 million users in 2020 alone. Like it was such a gigantic explosion because all these people who had been in service industry jobs were suddenly out of work, and all these people who had been in office jobs were suddenly at home jacking off, and it was like this perfect perfect marriage for it to explode. And I do think that when it becomes something that is common, like it gets harder and harder to imagine when you think about like the number of young women that have had an OnlyFans, and you think about like you're not going to be doing that forever. Eventually you're going to move on to doing something else, even if it's another form of media empire or whatever. But the idea of not hiring someone because in the past they had an OnlyFans, I think once you like, it just becomes more and more laughable, the more and more common that becomes. And so I think that it will, my hope anyway, is that the stigma will lessen, because I think it's really easy to have stigma towards something that seems like it's done by other people you don't know, who are far away, that you don't have to think about or look at. And when it's your nice niece, Steffi, who was having a hard time, it becomes like a totally different thing where you're like, well, what was it really so wrong that she sold some pictures of her tits on the internet, you know? And so I think that there is kind of this cultural reckoning, I hope, that's going on with just looking at the ways that our stances against sex work are sort of like self-contradicting, and like maybe no longer serving us, like maybe holdovers, unexamined holdovers from a previous era.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are seeing more folks now breaking into more traditional media who started in adult media, or started in perhaps what you might think is more traditional porn, right? Um, so yeah, you would think it's got to start breaking down. I mean, do you see that trickling down into other? I guess that's the question. Um, do you see that trickling down, or starting to influence how we, as a culture, perceive other sex workers, though?
I don't know. Like I think there's this boudoir photographer slash like male feminist online, Sizorg, who I really love following because his social commentary is just so good and so lucid. And he also then started an OnlyFans and is like selling spicy pictures of himself in part because like his audience is all like probably, I mean, I actually don't know his exact demographics, but it seems to me like it's all middle-aged feminist women who are like, you know, like say it, like, yes, this is exactly what I think is going on. And then they're like, hey, you're hot. and
Right.
and he's trying to make a living. But I think that so I guess I'm saying is that I think that the internet is making it so that more varieties of kinds of people who might not have considered sex work are considering it.
Mm,
And because they are ultimately making content, their personality and their intellect is on display in a way that makes it less easy to dehumanize them, where they are not just moving body parts on a stage, they're not just renting their bodies by the hour. It's like very clear that they're people and they're building a personal brand that is based on their personality, that is based on their persona. And so I think that um, in the world of, it's just another form of celebrity, basically. And I think that OnlyFans personas are becoming online celebrities
oh,
in a
totally.
way that puts them on an equal footing with every other kind of online celebrity.
Yeah, totally. So I have one more internet question. It's kind of a turn, and I don't want to give too much away in this book, but part of the plot does hinge on the possibility of meeting someone from the internet in real life. And I think the book so perfectly balances like the huge amount of hope with also like the terror of this might change my life. This might change my life because I get murdered. So I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask anyway. Would you meet a stranger from the internet?
Okay, so I think that I grew up in the era where I find it very romantic, this idea of like getting to know someone only through their words and falling in love with them before you ever meet them. I think that, and maybe there's just something about like my 90s like sensibility where that seemed like like the internet could be this like magic portal that could allow you to have some sort of like true soul communion with this other stranger who is like secretly perfect for you. um I have since learned that like that idea is not as romantic to other people as it is to me. And so I had to kind of like work to make that whole plot line like work for other people. Like it had to be refined because like there were a lot more even like red flaggish type things that were bothering other readers that I was like, oh, I know that's fine. So I think that I am farther on that spectrum, but I would totally meet someone that I had met on the internet because literally, I mean, I met my husband in an online dating site. How different is that? I don't know. I mean, people are all just people and some of them are on the internet. It's just that you have really cherry picked data about people when you're meeting them on the internet.
Totally. I will say I think that may be a little bit of like a 90s like forums chat room attitude.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Spent
Today, I
so
mean,
much
as if
time.
I didn't grow up in this too. Like I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. So let me switch gears. You've talked about it some, but I do want to talk about motherhood in this book because this book's an incredible motherhood book. I'm not a mother, but I really empathize so much with the characters in this book. I think for all the focus on Margo freeing herself from the stigma around sex work, which this book I think does a lot of work to have that conversation. You save your most scathing bits, your most righteously angry bits, and I think beautifully and wonderfully so for the hypocrisy of how mothers, particularly single mothers, are treated in America. Can you talk about that some?
Well, I mean, I think I was raised by a single mom. And so I have a lot of sentimentality about that relationship. I mean, and also I gave it so that Margo is sort of the second generation of single mom in her life. Her mom also pretty much raised her as a single mom. And so there's a lot of like odes in there to that relationship for me and like the special kind of bond that you can develop between like an only child and a single mom. Um, I do. I mean, so I got pregnant with my first child by accident when I was 26. And we decided to go all in and get married. But I had only known the man who became my husband for 3 months when we got married. So it was a big leap of faith, 90s forum style. And it turned out to be like the best gamble that I ever made. But we were both, grad student broke. And I was just shocked by how impossible it was to have a baby. Like, I was like, how is anyone else doing this? Like, we're so lucky. We're so privileged in so many ways. Like, we don't have money, but we do have family willing to help. And we do have, like master's degrees. Like, that really helps. And loads of debt. The debt is so helpful for the baby. And so, but I think that I was just like, it all of a sudden became so clear to me. I was like, how is anyone doing this? This is impossible. The system is set up to be so impossible. Even just like the fact that like 2 days after you're discharged from the hospital with major abdominal surgery, you're then supposed to like drive 40 minutes to a doctor's office to have a checkup. And you're like, really? Like, this is crazy. Like, there's no one to drive me. Like, I have to drive myself and I have to put this tiny baby in a car seat. It doesn't like that. I'm scared of moving it around still, like, and it hurts. And like, how am I supposed to carry this thing? I'm not allowed to carry things, but I have to carry my baby. But I have like all these stitches and, it was, really shocking to me that America was so poorly set up for women and to support them. And it seems so strange because we also obsessively venerate family in this country and the idea of the nuclear family and children. And I mean, so there's so much rhetoric around that. And yet we're not really even interested in giving women maternity leave or, safe and affordable childcare, let alone like our maternal morbidity outcomes are worse than any other developed country in the world. Why is our infant mortality so high for a developed country? Why are we just failing women and babies in this way when we claim to hold these values of caring about family and children? And especially when you're like right now, women are seeing their reproductive rights completely rolled back and their freedom of choice taken from them. It just is really bewildering. The disconnect in the rhetoric between like these children are sacred, but we're not going to make any room for them in society. We're not going to prioritize taking care of them or feeding them or, even educating them. Like you're like, well, then what really is this about? It just becomes more and more clear that it's not actually about prioritizing those children or holding them sacred. It's just actually about controlling women.
Yep. Yeah. As I think it often, always has been. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe on a more positive note, and don't feel like you have to answer this if it's too close. But after I read the book, I read that gorgeous piece you wrote for, I believe it was Today, about growing up with your mom and how that shaped your writing. Just fabulous piece, by the way. And this book to me as a writer, as a reader, feels really close to the cuff in a lot of the ways. Is there maybe a way, did you feel like you were putting a lot of yourself into this book, or maybe writing yourself in it in a way you didn't with other books or anything?
I mean, I think that there's always, I don't tend to write like plots that mirror my life, but I think there's a lot of myself in all of my books. I think that this one feels in some way more personal because like the more I was looking at what Margo and Jinx were doing in persona building, I mean, it's just right there that that's what I'm doing too, right? I'm putting on the Margo mask and I'm like, okay, I'm Margo now. And talk to me about this. And it's so close to drag and it's all art. It's all art was what I was sort of realizing. And so then I was like, oh, maybe there's this way that I can play with my own part in this, and that I can like invite the reader to imagine me behind the scenes a little bit and invite them to see what I'm doing with persona as well. Because I always have wanted to be the kind of writer that writes in like this cool, dispassionate, omniscient third person. And I'm just not, my way in is always first person and doing an imitation of someone's voice, like trying to figure out how are they talking, how are they thinking. Like that's my way into character. And character is kind of the whole thing for me. It's like what
For
I'm
what
most
it's worth,
interested
you're
in.
very good at it. But sorry to interrupt.
Well, thank you. But so I think that I think that in that sense, the book is a lot more personal because there is an urgency to me trying to explain why I'm writing the book at all, you know, and what's at stake for me emotionally in like the artistic project itself.
Mhm.
And so that feels very personal. I think that the single mom only child stuff feels very personal. Um, but there's all sorts of ways that it is, you know, like obviously I've never been a pro wrestler. I mean, so much of what is fun about fiction is that you get to take these incredibly personal things and put them out there, but also wrapped up in all sorts of things that are just like fun to read about and that you've gone down a rabbit hole and you've become obsessed with. It's like a garden of obsessions. And I think you don't have any choice over what obsesses you, right? It just either obsesses you or it doesn't. And so then you're just sort of stuck with it, like you're stuck being yourself, you know? But there's always something personal about someone's obsessions. They're always their obsessions for a reason. And so even in my obsessions with morality, with the wrestling, with the sex work, with all of it, I think that as much as those things are not me, like obviously they're obsessing me for a reason that is deeply personal, you know?
Yeah, of course. Well, I've got my one crafty question because everybody likes that. Totally. And you touched on it a little, but as Margo tells her story through the book, you are shifting back and forth between Margo's first person voice, very strong, and this third person. The way I read it is that throughout the whole book, Margo is telling her story, but there are just these moments she has to disconnect, for whatever reason, you know, for a number of reasons. She's got to step back from her own story to believe it even happened, or maybe even to look away from it as it's happening. But that's me. So, do you want to talk about why you did this?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I have to write a lot of exploratory material when I'm starting a novel to try and figure out who are the characters and what are the themes and how's the plot actually going to work. And there's so I really, I mean, I sort of touched on this before. I always wanted to be the kind of writer who could write in third person. All my books have been in first person. And so I was like, this is going to be the one. I'm going to figure it out this time. And so I was writing sections in first person and then writing them in third. And I was trying to understand what can third person do that first person can't do and what can first do that third can't. What things can I not move over? What are different things that occur to me when I'm writing in third person that don't occur to me in first or vice versa? Like just trying to figure out what the gears in the cockpit even were, right? And as I was doing this, and then I was realizing what the themes of the book were, and I was realizing persona, I was like, maybe there's some way that I can talk about like this layer of like how creepy it really is, how manicured and manipulative. I don't know. I think a lot about manipulation, right? Because this
Hmm.
is one of the things that women are often accused of. It's like part of our nature to be manipulative, and that this is like a bad aspect of feminine ability, right? Even makeup can be seen as like tricking men or being manipulative in some way. And I had sort of internalized that and always strove never to be manipulative in personal relationships. And then also was just like realizing the irony that like I literally manipulate people for a living. Like my whole job is to take control of somebody else's consciousness and then make them have a waking dream that is so compelling they're willing to ignore other people in the room with them. And like my job is to seduce, 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 seduce. And we think about it consciously. Like I teach writing. We talk about it all the time. We're like, it's like always, it's a not always be closing, it's always be seducing. You know, how do you become more and more and more seductive so that they cannot stop reading you? And so I was like, this is all part of this manipulation, artifice, artistry. You know, we have a wide variety of ways that we talk about it that are more or less pejorative. But I don't know. I sort of like I've wound myself in a little circle. I don't even remember the original question that I was asking, or that you asked.
Just why you
Oh,
were
how did I get to be writing about this? Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it started literally from being like, I always wished I could write in third person. And then I was like, what if I made this a motif?
writing. Yeah, totally. I think it works so well. I think it's a method too, at least for me, and again, this is me reading it, of highlighting what is so much of the beating heart of this book, and it's just the power of narrative, the power of story overall, period. The power of that seduction. But then what that seduction and that storytelling can do, what you can do with it. I love how it becomes this idea of how she's Margo in particular, but all of the characters really are using this to shape their own story. Particularly, so much of it is how she's learning to shape her story so that she can dictate her own life, you know. But there's also, I love you play with this other side of this in the book too. There's also so much about the freedom of just embracing your life, embracing what it is, and letting go of the power of anyone else's story about what your life is. So I guess this is all just a way of asking, what are your thoughts on the power of storytelling or the power of story in this book?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the sort of key moments for her is when she turns heel, right? This idea of um, letting it be okay if the story everyone is telling about you is negative, like, not being afraid. We're such profoundly social animals, and one of the things that fascinates me is like, I actually haven't read about this in like 10 years, so maybe they've discovered new things about it, but just sort of like the anthropologist says they've been like, why do all humans tell stories? Like, what is it about this behavior that is so rewarding that, like, in every culture, storytelling is like a major aspect of culture? And basically, the idea that is that mind reading is so important. So, in the same way that, like, when you play chess and you win, you're like, I'm smart, or you run a race and you win, you're like, I'm fast, I'm agile, I'm fit, I'm gonna survive. It's an affirmation of that. When you read a novel and you correctly make an inference about someone's motivations for doing something, this imaginary person, and then pages later, you were proved right, the little reward you're getting is, oh, I correctly read their mind. I knew why they were doing that. I made inferences. And we are such social animals that our survival in the group really does depend on the goodwill of others and on being able to correctly figure out who's mad at you and how mad they are and what they're going to do next. And all sorts of mind reading is really vital to us as social animals, and we really can't live on our own in a wilderness setting. So being part of the group, being accepted by the group, are really like important sort of like evolutionary factors for hominids. And so I think about that, and I think that it's primordially terrifying to turn heel, to stand in an arena and have everyone scream and boo and be like, I hate you, you fucking suck, like, that
Yeah.
is so scary. And I think it's scary to do something that other people are going to disagree with, like do sex work. And it is also therefore empowering, because you realize that you don't have to just do what everyone else thinks you should do. You actually have a whole freedom of range of motion once you step outside of those lines. And I think that it is really like wildly and dramatically empowering to understand that, like, you have free will. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
You're not actually trapped.
Yeah, to understand all the wild implications of that, like every direction that can go. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely. Well, that's what I've got. Although with that, let me
We've really figured out
all
existence here,
right. Yeah,
Yumi.
we
I'm pretty
knocked it
sure
out today,
that's
so this is great. I mean, I'm glad we figured this out. Thank you for your time. Yeah. No, let me wrap up with a total, it's a bookstore thing here. So what are you reading? What are you watching, listening to, whatever? Speaking of stories and all that.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm just finishing up reading God in the Woods. which I'm enjoying heartily. And I actually just read, I'm writing a thriller next, so I've been reading a lot of thrillers. So I just read a Lee Child's, like a Jack Reacher novel. I'm just trying to understand how they work so that I
Totally.
can like do a passable job. I always hate it when literary writers borrow from genres and then like do it wrong.
Yeah.
So if I'm gonna go out there and borrow all their cool equipment, I feel like I gotta try and do a good job. And
Yes.
then really, it's like I can't even tell you how many books have been sent to me in the last 30 days. It's my galley pile is sky high. It's really bananas.
Yeah, there's a lot this fall and winter. It's but yeah. Um, I don't
And
know,
yet
my
no one has sent me the new Sally Rooney. Hmm. Sorry. Just trying to put it out there in case anyone wants to
totally
send it to me.
put it out there. I'll see if we have one. Um, I honestly don't think we do, but I'll see. But yeah, yeah, I don't know. I have no advice for writing thrillers. Not that you're asking, but in case you were, I don't know, don't name the guns too much, but I think you have to do it like you have to do it a little bit
So
because
I made friends with this private eye at a little league baseball game, and he brought in his guns for me to handle. Like I got to like hold them all, and boy, are they so surprisingly heavy.
yes. Yeah.
I don't know. I wasn't expecting them to be quite that heavy, but they are made of metal, so it does kind of add up.
Yeah. I suppose maybe it's good that there's a weight to it, some metaphorical weight that you
I
throw around.
think that the guns that this particular guy has are real, like they're made to stop people. You know what I mean? Like I don't
Right.
I
This
think that
is
there's
yeah,
other handguns that might be less
right.
weighty.
Yes. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
Um,
I guess don't get on his bad side. Um, oh, the other thing I should ask. Do you want to talk about the TV show at all?
oh, sure.
Totally. So the book's gonna
That
be a
was such
TV,
a
so yeah.
wild. I mean, the way that that all happened was so unusual. It was so unexpected, and there was just it was just a really wild ride, and has wound up being so. It basically was optioned by A24, David E. Kelly, Nicole Kidman, and Elle Fanning, and all kind of like came together. And then they got a straight to series order from Apple TV. So they're writing it now. And it's like a dream. It's a dream team. Like it's like a dream scenario. It's really fun the amount that they've let me be involved just in terms of like reading scripts and
Okay.
I could not be more excited. I think I have very much a feeling like especially there's sort of a one-to-one relationship between a movie and a book where you're like, "Oh, you're making the movie of the book." But with a show, I feel like they really need to depart from the book and the show be
Mhm.
allowed to kind of become its own thing.
Okay.
And so I'm just really excited to see what they do with it. But the one thing that they were like, if there's anything that like you hope that, like, what are you afraid will get wrong and what are you hoping that we do? And I was like, I hope you find a way to get more LARPing in there. I had it all set up and ready to go, but I couldn't make it adjacent enough to the plot and I was having real length problems, but like just constant orcs, constant weird Super Mario stuff. Like, please fill that house with LARPers. And then they were like, "What are you afraid will get wrong?" And I'm like, "I'm afraid the baby not having any lines is going to get lost in things." And like, how do you have? I don't know how hard it is to work with baby actors. I assume there's a lot of laws. Babies are
Right.
temperamental. I think getting those moments to translate are going to be really hard, and it's going to be easy to forget to build in those moments where she's falling in love with the baby, and where I don't want Bodhi to just become a doll on someone's hip. Like, I want him to
Yeah.
like be part of it, and that seems like a challenge in trying to make the show.
Yeah, I'll
But
ramble
so
about the book for a minute more. You did such a great job of making Bodhi such a physical presence, such a little beginning of a person throughout the book, too.
I know. I wish that in my originally I wanted to write about the business that she and JB start and like that was where the book started for me. And then I just kept going back in time and back in time and back in time. And so I had always wanted to get to the point where Bodhi was like talking and like an actual person. And I was so like bummed in a way that I couldn't
Mm.
stretch the timeline long enough to get him there. But the next book that I'm writing is like my spectacular love ode to 11-year-old boys everywhere. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah. Okay. Can you say anything more about it? Because I'm
Yeah, I mean, so it is a thriller set in the world of Little League in a small town in California. There are time travel elements. There's a there's robotic cats. I mean, there's everything that you could dream of. I love like CIA and like spy tech stuff, and like I obsessively watch videos and interviews with like ex-CIA agents, and I just like find the whole, they're such weirdos, like the people that are drawn to intelligence, and I don't know, it's just a fascinating world. Like I think that I don't think I ever would have been a good CIA agent, because I think that there's like really specific things you need to be good at. But I can imagine getting seduced into like trying to have some role. Like, I don't know, I could work in the office or something.
totally. It's kind of fun to watch a writer like you being obsessed with something. So I cannot wait for whatever is next. Absolutely. Well, Rufi, thanks so much for taking the time. We appreciate it. Um, for those of you watching this, grab a copy, grab several, give them to your friends, give them to everyone you know. Margo's got money troubles. This will be on the internet. There'll be a little link somewhere down there where you can buy it from Boswell. If you're not in Milwaukee, or if you're in the area, you can come into the store, or if you're in Milwaukee and you're just lazy, you can buy it on the internet too. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.